Hey everyone, there is a new episode of my Patreon exclusive podcast, Maybe You Can Relate, available now to the patrons of the Rural Woman podcast. You can get access to this full episode, plus extended episodes and patron-only episodes of the Rural Woman podcast when you join the patron community over on Patreon at tier 10 or higher. Here's your sneak peek of the new Maybe You Can Relate episode. Hey folks, I'm Caitlin Dubin. You may know me from such podcasts as the Rural Woman podcast, which you happen to be a proud member of the Patreon community, which is why you are hearing me through your earbuds right now. I'm coming to you from behind the mic in the Rural Woman podcast studio for this exclusive patron-only podcast to share with you a bit more about me, my personal life, our farm, my family, the wins, the struggles, really just a little bit of everything. I wanted to create a space to share my story with a more intimate audience to build a stronger connection. My goal here is to share about the things I've learned, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And maybe, just maybe, you can relate. I kind of visualize the circus poster where there's like either an elephant or a clown balancing on a giant beach ball. And I can relate to that. I can relate to the balancing on the ball and juggling and all of the things. But today I want to kind of dive into the topic that is all too familiar in our fast-paced lives, and that's the competing priorities, and whether it's work or family, your personal goals, your farm and business goals, or your social commitments. I feel like I've talked about this before, or maybe it's just been in my head about identifying what your core priorities are. And when we're thinking about the circus and when we're thinking about juggling, you know, we have the glass balls compared to the rubber ones. And I think when we identify what those glass balls represent, those are the core priorities. So that can be your family, your career, and your health. Those can be your pillars. And if we take the time to actually slot in those categories, then we can prioritize and see it visually. I know this is something that I've done in the past, and it's eye-opening. And especially when we're talking about business as an entrepreneur, and I know a lot of you are entrepreneurs yourselves, we can come up with some really great ideas of what the next best thing is going to be for us. But when we look at what they fit into, which category they go into, sometimes they don't align with what our core priorities are or what our core business is. Part of my self-care at this moment is releasing podcasts bi-weekly. instead of weekly. And to be honest with you, that was a decision that I didn't make lightly. Taking a break back in the spring where I didn't release anything at all, that was a real mind meld for me. It was hard, but I knew at that point in time, I needed that time to regroup, to be able to do this in a sustainable manner. That's what I had to do. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon. Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and admin support from Kim & Co. Online. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre and Carrie Munven from Laystone Farms. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at the Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story.